It's Thursday, January 30th, 2020, and welcome to Your Daily Detroit. I'm Jer Stays. On today's show, a deeper dive than we've done before on some hot topics across the state, what Michiganders are saying, and why. See, most polls focus on the horse race, who's up and who's down. But this is more about what's on the minds of Metro Detroiters and Michiganders, and to get an idea as to some of the solutions. Joining me and Sven Gustafson to talk about it is Brad Williams from the Detroit Regional Chamber. He's the Vice President of Government Relations. Of course, we talked about roads. Historically, Michigan has been last in the nation, 50 out of 50 states, when it comes to per-person spending. But that's not all. Let's get to that conversation right after we say thank you to our members on Patreon who help make this show possible. Jim just joined us. Thank you. Also Clayton, Zach, Leslie, and Steven. And everyone else, of course, thanks to you too. You can join those cool people at patreon.com/dailydetroit. In the Motor City soundboard at Motor City Casino, we're at the Detroit Policy Conference, and joining me and Sven at the table is Brad Williams for the Detroit Regional Chamber. How you doing, Brad? Welcome back to the show.
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I'm excited to talk to you. Listeners to the show will know we spent a little bit of time on it, but you all, along with Glenn Gariff Group, did a very interesting poll looking at a variety of topics across the state. I mean, I don't even know exactly where to start because we went everywhere from healthcare to distracted driving to roads. So why don't we start at the top of the list then? I think let's talk roads. What did you find? And did you find any messages in there about what Michiganders are saying?
Yeah, well, let me start and tell you just why we did this, first of all. If you open up the internet, you can find any number of polls that will tell you who people are going to vote for. These horse race polls are interesting to political junkies, but they're not particularly helpful to policymakers who are looking to get some insight into what voters are interested in seeing them pursue. So that is the idea, is let's not ask people who they're going to vote for. Let's get something that's going to be useful. And so that's the point, is to get some idea of what's on the mind of Michigan voters. So we started by asking them, what do they care most about? We didn't give them a multiple choice question. It was open-ended. What is most important to you? And it's not a surprise that roads was at the top of the list.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, right. What I did find a little interesting was that it was so high up there, being that it's January, the timing of it. Usually you see that number spike in March and April when you get the thaw and the potholes get really bad. That it was so high in January was interesting.
I feel like it kind of is something that it shows that it's top of mind.
Yes. And I guess, we just came off a gubernatorial election where, roads and profanity were mixed together. So
FTDR, right?
Right. And a year of talking about it. So maybe that shouldn't be as surprising as I found it. So people want to fix the roads. It was somewhat distressing that they think we have enough money to do it already in the state budget.
Right, 53.3% said Michigan's got enough money to fix the roads.
Yeah.
Against 33 and some change who said we don't have enough money.
And that kind of flies in the face of what a preponderance of experts have said, that we have a really big road funding gap.
Yeah, what do you make of that, and what does it suggest about the work that Governor Whitmer and lawmakers have ahead of them?
So a couple things. We have a $10 billion state general fund budget. We have a $2 billion need for road funding. And so, if
that's like the floor too.
Yeah. So if in fact we want to do this with existing funds, we need to cut 20% out of our general fund budget. So that's the entire Department of Corrections budget. So if we want to close every single prison in the state, we could do it.
That's not going to happen.
Unlikely.
Or you could cut schools, but that people aren't going to like that either.
Ain't going to happen.
Well, and that is separate. That is a constitutionally separate fund. So you could cut schools, but that is money that could not be used for roads.
Oh, okay.
So there is a couple reasons why I think this is true. One, every year coming out of the Capitol, and this comes from legislators of both parties, you'll see a press release that says we spent $100 million or $200 million of new money on roads, and that's record funding. It's more money than we've ever spent. And if you are a taxpayer in Michigan who's, trying to get your kids to school and get to the work, $100 million is a lot of money. I mean,
Sure.
$100 million is a lot of money, right? In any context, except for this.
I'd take
$100
it.
million is a lot of money, and $100 million rhymes with $2 billion. You know, when you're getting to that scale of money,
Nobody has context.
It's hard to to put it in context.
And when in reality, $100 million will pave a couple miles worth of roadway.
Right. But if you're just kind of looking at the headline and going about your day, and then you see, well, they spent all this money. I thought they spent all this money. Nothing's gotten better. Then that cynicism's somewhat easy to understand. The other thing is, you might be driving down the road and you see, all these orange barrels went up, say, on 275. They must be fixing 275 finally. Well, in reality, they probably only have the money to put maybe 2 inches of asphalt on it instead of do a full reconstruction, which is probably what's necessary. And so next spring, maybe there's potholes showing up on 275 again. You think, well, they just fixed this. They must be wasting my money. Well, no, they weren't wasting your money. They just didn't have the money to do the right fix. And so the cynicism, while it's frustrating to me, I also can empathize.
Although I empathize with that cynicism, I also feel like you could take 5 minutes of research and know that there is a lot more to this. I mean, Michigan is far behind our neighbor states on spending per capita on roads.
Yeah.
There's other topics in Michigan that we just don't invest in. And I have heard from business owners and people looking at the state that there is getting to be a point that people are frustrated that we don't understand that we have to make investments into our region and into our state, that these things don't get through, that you could put these facts out there, but it's just not resonating with folks. And it really gives me pause about the competitiveness of our state against the rest of the country. And I know as a business attraction group, that must concern you.
You know, there are certainly times where we want to talk about efficiency and spending our resources wisely, but there are also times where we need to make investments. This is one of them. Regional transit is another one of them, where it requires more resources than we currently have, and it has to be a balance between the two. You know, we're trying to communicate that to our members and to voters as much as we can, that this requires more money than we currently have, and the more time we take, the more we delay, the more it costs. You know, it's kind of like, the analogy is, if you don't spend the $40 to change the oil in your car right now, eventually your engine's going to go out, and then the repair becomes a lot more expensive. I mean, it's a similar analogy. If the more time we waste in fixing the roads, then all of a sudden you're going to have to do a full repair or a full rebuild. And building a new road is a lot more expensive than fixing a road that, you know, maybe requires a cheaper intervention at this point.
So where does the chamber sit on like what we should do? Like, how should we make up this giant $2 billion a year gap? Like, what would be your preferred fix?
Yeah, I mean, our perspective is that a user fee is the best way to accomplish this. And the way that Michigan's constitution is structured is that gas taxes and registration fees are constitutionally dedicated to roads. And so, you know, as you talk to voters, they want to make sure that, you know, any money they pay for roads goes to roads. And the Constitution says that gas taxes and registration fees are constitutionally dedicated to roads, so they can't be spent on anything else. As blunt instruments as they are, those are the best ways to go about it right now. I think there is a much longer conversation we can have as to whether those are the best ideas in the long term, particularly as we go towards electrification and new sources of energy. But for right now, that is the best way to go about it.
So hiking gas taxes, essentially.
I think that is the best way to go at it right now. But I've spent, most of my career thinking and talking about this. I think there are lots of other ways to attack this. But, you know, when the governor came out with a 45-cent plan, my jaw dropped too. But it is the simplest and easiest way to get money in the bank as quickly as possible.
Well, I mean, this is kind of like when a bill comes due and you're like, oh, I didn't know the electric bill was going to be this much, but you got to pay it.
Right.
And I think that's the situation that our financial budget's in. Now, I got to ask this because I look at electrification down the horizon, things like that. Do you think that a gas tax is the most durable way to do this? Because my worry is like electrification is going to be slow until it's not, right? And then once it hits a tipping point, you're going to have a lot less people using gas but still driving on those roads. Do you think that horizon is far enough out that the gas tax is the best way to go.
So one thing to think about in the medium term, too, is that when in 2016, I believe it was, when the legislature did a modest gas tax increase last, they also put a new registration fee on for electric and hybrid vehicles that is indexed to the gas tax. So if the legislature were to pass the 45-cent gas tax right now,
which is right now not
on the
table.
is unlikely at this point. But
Right.
if they were to do it, that fee then would increase by that same proportion. So for example, I drive a Volt. I pay an additional registration fee. My Volt, even though I use far less gas than, say, a Chevy Cruze or a comparable sedan.
Or a big truck or something.
Yeah. My total amount of taxes and registration fees input into the system is roughly the same of a car of the comparable size. So there is a built-in mechanism that covers us in the short and the medium term. Long term, I think there's probably a better way to attack this, though.
Where does the chamber fall on the idea of toll roads, which is an idea that's starting to get...
Yeah, we have not taken an official position on it. Here's what I will say for toll roads, just thinking about this big picture is when you think about the Ohio Turnpike, that's kind of, for Michiganders, probably the first one that comes to mind. The Ohio Turnpike was built, before the interstate highway system was put in place. And so the Ohio Turnpike works because there is no other way to get across Ohio. In Michigan, probably the toll road that would be, or the highway that would be the easiest or the most profitable to toll would be I-94. But when you think about I-94, if you were to, say, drive from Dearborn to Jackson and you didn't want to pay a toll, could you go from Dearborn to Jackson?
Sure, but it'd take a long time.
Well, but you could take Michigan Avenue, right? There are ways to avoid tolls on I-94 in a way there aren't on the Ohio Turnpike. And so it's not as simple as the Ohio Turnpike. And so, there have been some analysis done, is my understanding. I've not seen them, but that the finances don't work out quite as well as people assume that they might.
But couldn't it be like part of, maybe toll roads is not going to be like the single silver bullet, but it could definitely help raise money, right? It could be part of the mix.
And I think we would certainly be open to the conversation. We'd have to see some numbers on it.
Yeah, I'm not a huge toll road defender, but I've driven in Ohio, I've driven through Indiana and Illinois, and there are a lot of toll booths and everything. But they've come out with that new technology where you get the little transponder thing and you don't have to stop at a booth.
It's a lot simpler than it used to be,
and the roads are sure as heck a lot nicer than they are here.
I think we are at the point in Michigan where you can't dismiss anything out of hand.
All right, well, let's move on. One of the other things I think that was, just kind of mentioning the top 4 responses that respondents said were their top issues. Jobs in the economy, probably no surprise. That's more or less a perennial issue.
This is Michigan.
Education funding, same thing. But water and sewer infrastructure was kind of an interesting one. We're the Great Lakes state. We've always prided ourselves on our clean water and drinking water and everything. What do you make of that kind of sneaking in there?
Well, I think considering where we've been in Michigan for the last 5 years or so, whether it is Flint or PFAS or Line 5, it doesn't surprise me that much. Governor Whitmer has made this one of the hallmarks of her administration, right? If you ask Governor Whitmer what she's focused on, she'll talk about roads, talent, and clean drinking water. And so that doesn't surprise me all that much. It's certainly something that we need to think about. People talk about infrastructure and they think about roads, but infrastructure means way more than roads. It does mean clean drinking water and making sure that the pipes underground are in good shape. It means making sure we're delivering world-class internet, not just in urban areas, but across the state. It's the electrical grid. And so infrastructure has a pretty broad definition that, organizations like ours need to be thinking about and are thinking about beyond just roads.
Mm-hmm. And then you also asked respondents about national issues that they thought were really important. The ongoing impeachment saga of President Trump, probably not surprisingly, number 1. Economy of jobs again, but healthcare came in 3rd, which was interesting. Talk a little bit about kind of what you saw from the respondents there.
Yeah, so we asked a cadence of questions on healthcare, and next week, obviously, Democrats cast the first votes in the presidential election in Iowa. And, we know that Democrats across the country are thinking about electability as they're making their decision. And if you're wondering about electability, you're probably wondering what voters in Michigan are thinking. And healthcare has been, one of the few flashpoints in the Democratic primary. And so we decided to ask about it. And we asked about this in July as well. And so we asked about, what your position is on this Medicare for All question. Only 20% of Michigan voters were in support of Medicare for All. I think that was interesting. But then we also asked them about what their current situation with healthcare is. One, and I thought this was really interesting and is way different than it would have been had we asked this question in 2008. Only 4% of Michiganders are currently without health insurance.
Yeah, which is a pretty low rate.
I mean, that speaks to, one, the impact of the ACA, but also Healthy Michigan.
And Medicaid expansion.
And the decision Governor Snyder made early on in his term to work towards Medicaid expansion.
Well, one thing about this conversation, too, I think that people forget that in Michigan, we're a pretty benefit-rich state. Mm-hmm. We've got unions that, union members that I think, Sven, they pay 3% or something like that in their contract. We've got that Medicare expansion. That's more than other states. And I think, especially when people are talking about this specific topic, I think people forget that Michiganders, as far as healthcare, have a lot of coverage.
Right. So when we asked this Medicare for All question, Medicare for All was least popular amongst, strong Republicans, which no surprise.
Yeah, of course.
No.
But the next two groups amongst which it was least popular were union members and African Americans. And so, if you are thinking, if you are a Democratic candidate for president, union members and African Americans are a pretty important members of your coalition. And so, Democratic candidates for president who are trying to win Michigan I'm sure are paying attention to that.
Well, and that's something for me, and I know this was not in your poll, but it makes me think personally, it gives me pause about especially like a progressive candidate on the progressive left, because Medicare for All is like the signature thing, and it kind of shows the lack of inroads with that side, with that faction of the party, with union members and with African Americans, two areas that they've traditionally not done well with.
I think it's a really, really interesting data point there. And I think a week from now, we'll have a pretty good insight as to at least what Iowa Democrats are thinking. Iowa's a pretty strong union state, too, as far as Democratic politics. So I think it will be interesting to see where Iowa voters come down on this, too.
All right. Well, Brad Williams, Vice President of Government Relations at the Detroit Regional Chamber, thanks so much for coming by and talking with us about this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before I let you go, here are a couple things you should know. Since we had this conversation yesterday, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer unveiled a plan at her State of the State address to loan $3.5 billion to cover 122 projects on state trunk lines. The Michigan State Transportation Commission has already approved the bonds. Critics say that this is a loan and not a permanent funding source, and none of the money can be used for local roads. This all would be true, but with the state legislature locked in a long-term impasse and the cost of fixing roads going up as time goes on, it's what the governor can do through the executive branch. Those in Lansing say that there will be work to create a permanent funding solution, but with this Band-Aid in place, if you want my honest thoughts, the track record of that happening soon isn't so great. Also, Crane's Detroit Business is reporting that a 34-story high-rise development in downtown Detroit, next to the Michigan Opera Theater, has been shelved by the organization. The reason? Market conditions. Doing the development would, and I quote, not significantly improve our revenue over what we already earn from the surface lot and the parking center, end quote. I'll put a link to that story in the show notes. So here's a little preview of coming attractions. I had a chat with the brilliant journalist and co-founder of Recode, Kara Swisher. Also, Sven talked with author Michael Zadorian, who has a new book out soon, The Narcissism of Small Differences. Those episodes will be in your feed next week, so stay tuned. And of course, thank you to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. You're a big part of making this show possible. I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.
Hey, Jer, it's a squirrel.
Ooh, hey, buddy.